The story of the Pacific War is usually told as a story of carriers and island hopping and the atomic bomb. It was all of those things. It was also this: a network of floating repair yards towed to the edge of the war and assembled there, one section at a time, by men whose job was to make sure every ship the Japanese managed to damage was back in the fight before Japan could count it as a kill. 4,000 miles from the nearest permanent dry dock, in an anchorage a Japanese reconnaissance pilot would later report as a carrier anchorage, a dock built in Pittsburgh, floated in seawater pumped from the same ocean that had tried to sink the ships it was lifting. 155 floating dry docks, 7,000 ships, a program that began with 3 steel docks and no plan and ended with the largest mobile repair infrastructure ever assembled in wartime. Nobody has made a movie about it. You probably hadn't heard of it. Now you know. October 1944, 2 Japanese aerial torpedoes hit USS Houston within 2 days of each other. She was flooding. Her propulsion was gone. Her keel was open to the sea. And the nearest dry dock, the kind of facility that could expose her hull, patch the steel, make her a warship again, was 4,000 miles away. The Navy didn't tow her 4,000 miles. They brought the dry dock to her. The U.S. Navy built an entire fleet of portable dry docks during World War II, 155 of them, and towed them across the Pacific to within striking distance of the fighting front. Some could lift a battleship. The largest could lift any ship in the fleet. They were built in pieces at yards across the country, most on the West Coast, some as far east as Pittsburgh on the Ohio River, floated or shipped to Pacific ports, towed through the Panama Canal or directly across the ocean and reassembled by hand in jungle anchorages in the New Hebrides and the Philippines. Almost nobody has ever heard of them. On December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor's permanent graving dock, Dry Dock No. 1, survived the attack. The ship inside it, the Battleship Pennsylvania, was damaged. The dock itself was intact. A second graving dock, No. 2, came into service 3 days later. But that didn't solve the actual problem. As the war moved west to Guadalcanal, to the Gilberts, to the Marianas, Pearl Harbor fell farther and farther behind the fighting front. A ship damaged at Leyte Gulf in October 1944 was roughly 4,000 nautical miles from Pearl Harbor. At 5 knots under tow, that's a 2-month round trip before permanent repairs even begin. 2 months out of a war that was measured in weeks. The Navy's warships took more underwater hull damage in the Pacific than most histories acknowledge. Torpedoes, kamikaze near misses that open seams, collisions, coral reef groundings in the dark. Any of those required a dry dock, a structure that could expose the hull below the waterline, where patching welds couldn't be done by divers in open water. Without a dry dock, you had a ship that could float but couldn't fight. Without a forward dry dock, you had a 4,000-mile problem. The man responsible for solving it was Rear Admiral Ben Moreell, Chief of the Bureau of Yards and Docks since December 1937. Moreell was the founder of the Seabees, the construction battalions that built advanced bases across the Pacific, and he understood the dry dock problem better than anyone. He'd been studying it since 1938, when the international arms treaties were collapsing and it became clear the Navy might need to project power into the Central Pacific without the fortified bases the Washington Naval Treaty had forbidden. His answer, developed with his bureau's engineers and a retired admiral-turned-civilian engineer named Frederick Harris, was a floating dry dock that could be built on land, towed across an ocean in sections, and assembled at whatever anchorage the fleet happened to need. Here's how it worked. Each section was a steel pontoon, 256 feet long, 80 feet wide, 28 feet deep, with 2 tall wing walls hinged at the base so they could be folded flat for the ocean tow and raised vertical at the destination. On arrival, paired 500-ton hydraulic jacks, working through telescoping box struts that reset between strokes, walked the wing walls upright, inch by inch, until they were locked in place and welded watertight. 10 sections bolted and welded end-to-end made a U-shaped channel nearly 1,000 feet long. Flood the ballast tanks, and the whole structure sank. Park a battleship over the keel blocks, pump the ballast tanks dry, and the dry dock rose, lifting the ship with it, exposing the hull to air, to light, to the welders and patchers who'd been waiting. The largest version, what the Navy called the ABSD, the Advanced Base Sectional Dock, had a total lift capacity of 90,000 tons. That's more than an Iowa-class battleship weighs, more than an Essex-class carrier. There was no American ship afloat that couldn't be docked in it, and it could be assembled in 3 weeks by a crew with wrenches, sledgehammers, welding rods, and a copy of the engineering drawings. The sections were manufactured at 5 contractors across 6 sites, most on the West Coast: Everett, Washington, Stockton, and Alameda, California, Mare Island Naval Shipyard. But the sheer quantity of steel required pushed some of the work east. The Pittsburgh Des Moines Steel Company built sections for the Guam docks in western Pennsylvania, on the bank of the Ohio River. When a section was finished, they floated it down the Ohio to the Mississippi, down the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico, around through the Panama Canal, and across the Pacific. Battlefield steel made thousands of miles of river, gulf, canal, and ocean before a single keel block was placed. The tows were extraordinary. The first ABSD, designated ABSD-1, later named USS Artisan, had 10 sections built at 4 different yards. 2 of those sections departed Morgan City, Louisiana, in July 1943, and towed through the Panama Canal and across roughly 8,000 miles of ocean to Espiritu Santo in the New Hebrides. The journey took more than 2 months. 8 other sections departed San Francisco in August and arrived in early October. When they all finally reached Espiritu Santo, the assembly crew began bolting them together in a jungle anchorage near a place called Paliculo Bay. Far enough from combat to work in the daylight, close enough to the war to matter. On November 2, 1943, while ABSD-1 was still being assembled, one of the sections sank. 13 sailors drowned. The section was eventually recovered and the program continued. But those 13 men are the hidden casualties of one of the largest engineering programs in American history. Their names aren't on the memorials that record what built the Pacific Victory. They died building something nobody had tried before, in an anchorage nobody had heard of, working on a structure so classified the press didn't know it existed. 8 sections were operational by the end of 1943. The full 10-section dock was ready in April 1944. That's what USS Houston needed in October 1944. She'd been hit twice, once on the 14th and again on the 16th off the coast of Formosa. 2 aerial torpedoes from separate attack waves. The first flooded all 4 of her machinery spaces. The second tore open her stern. She was towed to Ulithi, a forward anchorage about 1,300 miles away, where repair ships worked on her from alongside. But the hull damage was too severe to be patched without a dry dock. On December 14th, she was towed to Manus in the Admiralty Islands, where ABSD-2 was waiting. She entered the dock on January 8th, 1945. She was undocked February 14th. 5 weeks to repair the kind of damage that without ABSD-2 would have taken her out of the war for 6 months or more. Houston was one of dozens. On December 2, 1944, USS Claxton entered ABSD-2 at Manus alongside USS Canberra, already in the dock. USS Killen waited her turn outside. All 3 had been damaged in the same Lady Gulf campaign. 3 warships, 1 floating dock, 1 advance anchorage in the Admiralties, 5,000 miles from the nearest permanent yard. This was what the program was built for. At Opera Harbor, Guam, a second large dock, a BSD-6, was assembling through the spring of 1945. On May 11th, USS South Dakota docked there after a propellant tank explosion on May 6th that killed 11 of her crew. Her hull was sound enough to reach Guam under her own power, but the blast damage required dry dock inspection and temporary plating work before she could safely continue to a permanent yard. She was in the dock by May 11th, out by May 29th. 18 days in a floating dry dock assembled on a Pacific island. Then she was gone, back to the war. August 12th, 1945. 3 days before Japan agreed to surrender. A Japanese aircraft torpedo hit USS Pennsylvania in Buckner Bay, Okinawa, the last American battleship struck in the entire war. 20 men were killed. She was flooded badly enough to risk sinking if towed, so she was temporarily patched at anchor and then towed to Opera Harbor, Guam, arriving September 6th. She entered ABSD-3 on September 7th. A steel patch was welded over the torpedo hole. She was undocked. October 2nd, under her own power by October 4th. Sailing home. The war had been over for 3 weeks. The floating dry docks were still working. By the spring of 1945, there were 2 large ABSDs at Seeadler Harbor, Manus, ABSD-2, and ABSD-4. Their wing walls rose 60 feet above the water. Their pontoon decks stretched nearly 1,000 feet end to end. They sat at anchor in a protected bay, empty between dockings, looking, from the air, like nothing any pilot had been trained to identify. On April 22, 1945, a Japanese reconnaissance plane flew over Manus at 14,000 feet and reported back to its base. Its report described 2 aircraft carriers at anchor in the harbor. They were floating dry docks. Empty, between repairs, their ballast tanks pumped dry, both docks sitting high and flat above the water, wing walls extended. But from 14,000 feet through a camera mounted on a Japanese observation aircraft, the shape was close enough. A strike followed. On April 27th, a Japanese torpedo plane dropped an aerial torpedo that hit ABSD-2's 7th section. A second hit damaged ABSD-4. Both docks were repaired and returned to service. Japan had torpedoed what it believed were aircraft carriers. It had struck empty floating dry docks it didn't know existed, with a weapon that did less damage to reinforced steel pontoons than it would have done to a ship's hull. Step back from the individual ships and look at the whole program. The United States entered the war with 3 steel floating dry docks. By the end of 1942, the Navy's total floating dry dock lift capacity was about 108,000 tons. By the end of 1943, 1 year later, it was roughly 723,000 tons, a 7-fold increase in 12 months. And the lifting kept growing into 1944 and 1945 as more docks reached the war zone. The program ultimately built or procured 155 floating dry docks of all classes. In the period from October 1944 to October 1945 alone, approximately 7,000 ships were docked in floating dry docks across the Pacific. Everything from PT boats to battleships, destroyers to tankers, submarines to ammunition ships. The number is almost certainly an undercount. The floating dry dock program is why the Third Fleet could fight continuously for months without returning to Pearl Harbor for repairs. It's why a ship hit at Leyte could be patched at Manus and returned to service for Luzon. It's why, when Japan made its final kamikaze offensive in the spring of 1945, the American fleet absorbed the blows, repaired the damage, and came back. British Pacific Fleet officers who saw the American advanced bases in 1945 came away astonished by their scale, by a forward repair capability that had no equivalent in any other navy in the war. None of it was inevitable. In 1935, the Navy tried to build a one-piece, self-sustaining floating dry dock designed to dock battleships. The bids came back and the project died. Too expensive. No appropriation. In 1938, the sectional design was proposed, and it also died for lack of funding. It took Pearl Harbor to unlock the money, and it took Ben Moreell and Frederick Harris 2 more years after that to build something that had never been built before. A dry dock, assembled from parts shipped across an ocean in an anchorage where no dry dock had been, by sailors who had never done anything like it, and wouldn't be able to explain it to their families afterward because the whole thing was classified. After the war, the Navy renamed the class ABSD, became AFDB for Auxiliary Floating Dry Dock Big. AFDB-1 served at Guam during the Korean War, operational from 1952, then at Subic Bay in the Philippines from 1970, where she was officially named USS Artisan in 1979. She was placed out of service in October 1986, more than 40 years after she was assembled in a jungle anchorage at Palikulo Bay by a crew with welding rods and hydraulic jacks. AFDB-7 was towed to Scotland in 1961 to support the Polaris submarine fleet and stayed there for more than 30 years, until 1992. A RDC-13, one of the concrete variant dry docks built to save steel, was sunk at Bikini Atoll in 1946 during the atomic bomb tests. There are still sections of World War II floating dry docks in U.S. Navy inventory today, moored at Pearl Harbor, classified as miscellaneous vessels, waiting.